All right, y'all, I have a lot I want to say, and it's from all over the Bible. So this is a difficult topic, and exegesis can be difficult too. I mean, a lot of people will look at things that Jesus or Paul said and said, well, if you go back to the context, anti-missionaries will say, if you go back to context, it doesn't say what you say says at all. Especially with IO folks and things like that. But we can see in Second Isaiah lots of references to the nations, including beasts, and including laborious jobs of building the walls and suckling, and they're mentioned as kings and stuff like that. So I don't think it could be all from one nation at all. So that IO claim, especially regarding Second Isaiah, is absolutely absurd. But if you look at First Zechariah too, Zechariah also, we can see they're not supposed to have any walls, and the beasts are allowed in, and so on and so forth, which makes it really problematic when we talk about Nehemiah, because they want to spin it like there was no walls in Nehemiah's day, and then they'll go in and say just there was no gates had built and no one was standing in the gap or whatever. So all this gold was there the whole time and all these people, but they had no walls. So a lot of the problem with that is in Zechariah's day, and we know that Zechariah is about a generation before the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, because if you look at Nehemiah 12:26, it tells you the days of Nehemiah, which were the days of Ezra, which were a generation after the days of Zerubbabel, because they talk about his son, Jehoshua's son, Joachim. So Joachim was the son of, he was the high priest. So I don't think Ezra was a high priest. I think he was a priest and a scribe. But he's mentioned several times in Nehemiah. So I don't think that Ezra is any time different than Nehemiah at all. And some will argue, well, they added a few verses or a few chapters into Nehemiah to make it Christian prayers to Ezra. But they're actually going the opposite of how they usually do. Usually I'm the one who's critical and they the one saying everything that's in there is, what's supposed to be in there. But I think they could add stuff because this isn't like cutting and pasting where they'd have to like chop the scrolls and then fuse in some scroll with some tape or something. No, this is happening through transmission of oral law as well as scribes writing it down. So who's to say the scribe couldn't interpolate and add things? I mean, we see even in the New Testament where we have even better manuscripts, parentheticals and stuff that aren't in some manuscripts that we understand to be additions. And so what is this addition? Well, a lot of people argue that there's 13 apostles, because there's 12 and then there's Paul, so he's the 13th apostle. And I do believe that there could be 12, 13. I think they did this on purpose. When you look at the Old Testament, there's lots of renderings of the 12, and they come in all kinds of orders, whether or not they're talking about the land or what have you. But one of the most curious is 1 Kings 19, and whether or not there's an addition here, because they mention 11 other. They mentioned 12 other districts, and then they have basically a 13th district, and whether that was addition, maybe Solomon represents Judah, and therefore there wouldn't be one, but then some scribe came by later and added one. That could be. But it's very curious how you have this rendering I'd invite you to look at the next verse because it says Israel is the sands of sea. If you look at Joshua like 24, all the promises came true. So a lot of people, they all say, oh, we need to make sure the promise to Abraham come true in the future and stuff like that. When, this time here around the judges and stuff, they had the full extent of what was promised. And but if you look at 1 Kings 4:19 here in the Septuagint, it says Gaber, son of Adi, in the land of God, the land of Sion, king of Esbon, and Og, king of Basan. And these are all East Jordan. And then they have this very curious little verse, or not verse, recursion right here at the end. And one officer in the land of Judah. Well, NASB says of this verse was the only deputy who was in the land, and you have to basically assume they mean that part of the land or whatever. And then Judah's left out. And it's interesting that it says in verse 20, Judah and Israel were numbers as the sins of sea, but I thought this was before the division. And a lot of people don't understand the division because they'll go up to, the time of Rehoboam, just 10 chapters up or whatever, 8 chapters up. And they talk about that cloth, and how 10 were given to Jeroboam. But I'm not even sure. Okay. I'm not even sure where that is, but I think it's somewhere in chapter 12 or 13. But regardless, it's not the 10 people think about. Actually, a lot of the lands had already been absorbed into other lands, like all of Simeon, I think, became part of Judah. So then you got 3 tribes of the south. So therefore, you can't have 10 in the north and 3 in the south if you got 12. And then you have the Levites too. Which side do they go on? So you can't have Benjamin, Levi, Judah, all of them, including Simeon, and still wind up with 10 if there's only 12. So really, the 10, what they don't understand is that it's actually what they would think of as 9 tribes, but Manasseh or whatever is 2 tribes. The half tribe of the west and the half tribe of the east. So a lot of their notions about 10 is actually from apocryphal, 10 and 2 is from apocryphal literature. Like Second Esdras. I'm not saying that there wasn't this idea of the lost tribes, but this idea of the lost tribes actually goes way back to Hosea. And Hosea might not be older than first Isaiah, but I think it's definitely older than second and third Isaiah. Particularly if you look at Hosea 3:4, these are things that were before the Deuteronomical reforms of Josiah. Now, the Deuteronomical reforms of Josiah we see in Deuteronomy is the most obscure of the books because it talks about things from Numbers and Exodus, and but it's telling a new law, it's telling a different law, and retelling some of the old, as well as some of the new. And it's on a different mountain. People will try to say it's the same mountain, but it's very curious because it's in first person when none of the rest of the Torah is in first person, when it's the least likely to be around in that time period, which is very curious. And so when we look at Hosea 3:4, they talk about the pillars. Well, if you go back to Joshua 10, I think that that's what the Amorites had, was pillars, right? And they also had they probably had altars that were turned to chalk. Now, if you read Isaiah 27, Isaiah 28, it's very reminiscent of this when the sun sits still. This is the end of their time, when the iniquity of the Amorites is complete. The Amorites probably had an altar. I mean, who's will say that Shem was the high priest in Jerusalem, but that doesn't make any sense when later we see Abraham goes up there with his son to Mount Moriah, which happens to be the same word as the Amorites, Moriah. He's going up to some place where he doesn't know anybody and there's nobody there. So, it's very likely, especially the story and the anachronisms, that Genesis 14 was an addition. And especially when you look at Esau's descendants in 25 and stuff, I mean, they tell this twice, in the 30s. You go down all the way to 38, you got another story of Judah that seems to just be right in the middle of the story about Joseph. And then you have the story of the Shechem and Dinah, where when you see the cast of characters that was there, Reuben, I guess, was always just, he was too busy or whatever getting it in. But you see these people that are Levi and Simeon. Well, I mean, if it's just the ones that was oldest and most genetically related to Dinah, then there's your problem. There was Judah. Someone say, "Oh, he's just a baby. He's just a baby at that time." Well, you run into another problem. If Reuben didn't get it, and Levi got his, and Simeon, how's the fourthborn going to be chosen? And furthermore, the lastborn, Benjamin, who's part of Judah, and also who wasn't even there at the dealings with Esau. But also you have Joseph, who's one of the lastborn, who doesn't even get the promise, but his son, even a generation later. But we're supposed to believe that the elect is the elect. Well, that's what they're trying to tell you. They're trying to tell you about replacement theology. They're trying to tell you about supersessionism. They're trying to tell you the Amorites were the chosen people, or Esau was, or Cain, or however you look at it, Ham or whatever, was first. But then they replaced them. They came from, Turkey, Iraq, or whatever, way up in east of Euphrates or whatever. Came up over there and took it, and then that's a wrap. They want to say. So it says Olam, which means forever. Forgetting about how his fury would burn forever. There'd be no king from David's line forever, and all the other times they use forever. But they want to just look at the blessings and not the curses when they were both part of the law, which is fine. I mean, that sounds better, but. So there's some mention in 1 Kings 13:2 of Josiah way after the fact, way before the fact. So, there's so much I want to say that's kind of rehashing of things I've already said. So hopefully anybody that's watching this is watching my other videos, and I think it's true because only a few people watch my videos, so that's why I'm asking for help. Not financially, not asking y'all for a lot of work or nothing, but if y'all just tell a few people what I say and they tell a few people, then that can be, enlightening to people. That I'm not saying I'm bringing no light or nothing, but I'm looking at a different way to look at this based on study. And that's why I invite you out to take some of this and do some of your own studies, because I don't got time for all of this. I really don't. 1225. There Jeroboam built Shechem, and he went out and built Penuel. Isn't Penuel where Jacob was? So Jacob, wherever he was, saw angels descending and ascending. Well, that's what they would say would happen to the Son of Man. And him dashing across the sky, that would be that would make him God. That this is God's dwelling, and he's God himself, and this is huge. And what they don't tell you is they want to say, "Oh, he was never the Messiah. The Messiah was never God, and he was never supposed to die." And the problem with that is it's kind of not true what they say. And it's not even true what the Christians say about Romans 9 and Romans 11 and all that. Because he will tell you straight up that for his elect's sake, he uses the metaphor of 7,000 of Israel, not Judah, but Israel. And he says all Israel will be saved. And Isaiah, of course, is about Israel, which we know is where Jeroboam set up his capital, not where Rehoboam set up his capital. And but as we go into Second Isaiah and Third Isaiah, you do see the southern temple, the second temple, and different things like that. Because Second Isaiah was from the Deuteronomist, or Third Isaiah even. And so you already have the exile and the return and all that in the conscience. And the same is true for First Kings. I'm not saying the same is true for all Joshua and all the so-called Pentateuch and all that. Maybe what I personally mean is the first 4 books and the 6th book. In that time, they might not know now what would happen, and they might have continued on, and especially the Samaritans would have. And I'm not saying the Samaritans have the book of Joshua, but I'm not saying they don't either. I'm saying they probably had lots of books. When you go down to Dead Sea Scrolls, they got lots of books people did. There was no canon, and they probably didn't even have the titles on them yet, because in the New Testament, a lot of it's anonymous, the quotes from the Old, and they don't match up too good, and so on and so forth. And then they'll say, well, we know the Apocryphal is not really scripture because it wasn't mentioned in the New Testament. Was Esther mentioned in the New Testament? Was any of Ezra's works, or except for maybe Malachi? But a lot of these prophets, Malachi, Haggai, Zechariah, are Second Temple, surely. And it's interesting trying to analyze the Second Temple as what was good and what isn't, which brings me back to the walls. Now, what I'm trying to say about the walls is, as Zechariah and Isaiah are saying, that in the future, for their Second Temple, there wouldn't be any walls. Or if they did have walls or gates, that they would be open. And here's Zerubbabel and even Shaltiel or whatever, Shalbazar or whatever, I don't even know, some enigmatic first generation dude that it's hard to see what the purpose is of him. But then you have, who the rabbis would say was part of the same Kahal Gadol as Ezra and Nehemiah. You have these folk that when they went down there in the time of Darius, that they were they had gotten certain permission. So if you read Ezra 4, it was during the time of Ahasuerus that they had a little blurb and couldn't build, who they say is Xerxes. which has a problem because it doesn't follow the order of the kings in history. So, and to further this problem, they would try to tell you that Ahasuerus is Xerxes in Esther, and that Esther takes place well later in 400 or whatever. Now, the problem with that is when you put Artaxerxes after Xerxes, when you put Xerxes after Artaxerxes, you wind up with Xerxes II, and this is way later, and for that reason, it's hard to believe that these prophets could be talking about a time of unlimited growth and peace and security when by this time there was already threats from the West. And at this time, as Isaiah said, that the Tarshish and all the Westerners were going to come, there doesn't seem to be people coming from the West. And the people that is there seem to not welcome anybody coming. When Isaiah is talking about all these visitors coming to bring gifts and things like that, where they're telling everybody to get lost, Amstray. And this is why they couldn't build the walls, or they couldn't rebuild their temple. There was, as Ezra 4 says, a time of Ahasuerus, which is the same name as Esther, but they want to put Esther way down in the future. So here you got Xerxes, right in between Darius and Cyrus, which doesn't make any sense. So you got to put that after, and then you got Xerxes II, and then to have Artaxerxes follow that, you're at Artaxerxes II, and you're down at 400, by the time when they're already at war with Greece and everything, and I think Alexander's father, and grandfather had already taken like Lydia, the western coast of Turkey and stuff like that. So I don't believe any of that. I think that Ahasuerus was some king during the 70 years, or soon thereafter, and that fits better with the narrative from Ezra, and that Artaxerxes in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, if it is even that, it's probably Xerxes the first, and that's the time, within a generation or two of the 70 years, which we see in Ezra. So it's not 100 years later like they're trying to say it is. And so here we are in the rebuilding of the temple, where Zechariah, is here and making all these prophecies, but also Isaiah somehow, because they took these prophecies from later, and they put them into Isaiah at the end. Same with Zechariah even. So the phone's in my... One second. Okay. So that brings us to the topic of today, and that is Isaiah again. So if we what's really a good takeaway is from first Isaiah is, like I was saying, chapters 27 and 28, and this can really tell you about the sun sitting still and the altar being turned to chalk and stuff. And this is the old system. When we look at Hosea, they had the sacred pillars, which are supposed to be destroyed. Hosea 3:4, the teraphim. And no, this isn't the Elohim. This isn't the little votive idols. This is the shrunken heads of the Canaanites that they used for necromancy. And then they talk about the ephod, and the ephod had the umathermin, the two lots casting stones that they used for divination and cleromancy. And so you have all these things that don't seem to be part of the true religion. And what was the true religion was taking care of administering justice, and justice includes positive justice, like for the widow and the people that didn't really get a fair shake in their lives and stuff like that. But here we are in Isaiah. But before we go to Isaiah, let me briefly just take you to Jeremiah 33. This will help build the argument. Jeremiah 33:16. And it says, In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell in safety. And this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Well, that was the name of the Lord in Joshua 10, Adon Zedek. Or literally, if you somehow believe that the word Yahweh was still in the Old Testament, they didn't take it out, then it's Yehozadak. Well, Yehozadak is Yehozadakunu. The new is just possessive ours. If it was English, it'd be a different word altogether. A separate word, rather, but they contract words like that. And so we can ignore the new for now. But Yehozadak, or Yahweh Zedek, but you got to understand, like Yehoshua, it's really Yahweh Shua, that these are contractions. Even John, and these are normal contractions that they did. They would just say Yah instead of Yehovah, and or whatever, however you say it. I don't know how to say it, because Yehovah is Jehu. Jehu is Yod, He, Wah, Aleph. So I don't know, but they say that Hosanna in the name of the Lord, who came in his name. Well, Yehuda is from Yahuwah, so the name of the Lord is in their name. And so they call themselves the praised ones, basically. And so Jehozadak is, guess who? That is the father of Jesus, in as much as Jesus is Yehoshua in Zechariah 6. But as we saw in my last video, or few videos ago, that Zechariah 6, it was changed, because the one who was supposed to be crowned was the Davidic king, even though they weren't supposed to have a king. And that's what another problem with Hosea 3:4. And the stone that was before him was Zerubbabel, not Yehoshua. And that's the one with the 7 eyes, the 7 facets. Now, he had laid a block in Jerusalem, in the second temple, a costly stone, a rock of offense, a stumbling block. And we see from the New Testament authors that it wasn't Zerubbabel. That Zerubbabel was just a type of the real stone, the one that they rejected, the one that smashed the statue to pieces. And so how does this one smash the statue to pieces when it's smashing the Persian and all this, and the Babylonian and what have you, if those ones were already gone by then? And we have to understand that when the sun sits still, this is the end of their days. This is the day of the Lord. And the day of the Lord, we see from Joshua 10, was the judgment on his own previous people whose iniquity had filled up. And that's why I'm going to finish this discussion with the word until, because they use the word until a lot. Until the iniquity of the Amorites is complete. So what does that mean? Well, in Greek, there's different ones. There's Heos and there's Acri, and they can mean different things. So we're going to get into all that. Actually, I'll probably do that in my next video because where are we? 30 minutes in and haven't even started the discussion about until. But if I just briefly say, when we read Romans 9 and Luke 21:24, we see until the fullness comes, until the complete disfavor comes to them in Romans 11. So until means by favoring the other, that his original people would get the maximum of jealousy. Well, jealousy would be frowned upon. This would be opposite of what he's been trying to tell them about faith and everything. So their iniquity would be increasing, his disfavor with them in favor of another people. So until that time, well, we also see in Genesis 49, verse 10, that until Shiloh will the scepter be with Judah. So we have from the Amorites to the Israelites to the Judites to the nations. So and know the nations from the beginning, the 7 nations are not the nations of all the nations. So you do have this until that in no way is used to mean that after this time that it's going to go back to the prior people. It wasn't like after the Israelites went back to the Amorites or after the Judites went back to the Israelites, unless, like I've said from my renderings of some things in Hosea, Genesis 48, that there's a conflagration of the nations and Israel through osmosis of the son of Jeroboam, maybe even, and so on and so forth. But they have to look on their own sin, like the Nehushtan. Or the Nakash or whatever. Now, if we look here at Isaiah 62:2, it says, "The nations will see your righteousness, and all kings your glory." So are these Israelites going out into all these nations and becoming kings? Is that what the point of the exile was? It says here, "And you will be called by a new name." A new name. So how is he going to go back to Israel as the name that he's just going to rapture up the church and be dealing with blood Israel again? when we don't even know who that is. Like in 1492, a lot of people had to change their religion, and then they married all the Catholic people, and so you probably have them intermixed with all people. You know what I mean? And so what we have here is a situation where they were going to be called by a new name, Isaiah 62:2. And is it named Jehozadak or Jeremiah, like Jeremiah had said? Was that the name of the king of the Amorites in Joshua 10:1? Why did the Amorites need to fill their iniquity? Who is Shem a priest for in Genesis 14? What was the Lord doing? And if he before Moses, if he didn't really have a people before, let's say Abraham or whatever, what was he doing? How could they sin if they didn't have a law? How is it just for them to all be wiped out when they weren't even his people? How could he judge them? So, if you believe that after the nations it has to go back to Judea, then by that logic, after Judea, it's got to go back to the nations. And how many times are we doing this? And what's it even mean? Honestly, I think Paul's meaning of that and Luke's meaning of that is not that the nations are the nations from old, but that some of the nations of old became sojourners and grafted in. We see this to the Edomites and everybody through through all the book, that, and even in the history, secular history, Josephus and other things, that there's forced conversion. We see Jesus said that the Pharisees were looking for converts. So when we have this, we know that we can look at for Judges 1. That some of the old people never left, and they became part of the new people. The Gibeonites even became part of temple service. And for that reason, I think that's what Paul and Luke mean, that a few of them was going to be part of Israel, and a few of Israel is going to be part of Judah, whatever that was, whether it was Edom or Moab or whatever it was originally. Some Israelites we see in 2 Chronicles, they got invited down to celebrate Passover and stuff like that. So the replacement people actually contain some of the Israelites in there. And then when you got the Judahites who expropriated the name Israel, that all of the lost tribes don't get to use the term anymore, then there was a conflation of these two words. But this new name, Judahite or whatever, as we see in Zechariah, the Kodesh land, the Judeans or whatever, that this new name was going to, replace the old name. And therefore, this is what Paul's saying. Then Israelites that are chosen for his promise can only, because of they inherit the promises, but they can only be Israel, because not all Israel is Israel. They can only be Israel if they're one of those 7,000 priests. And he points out those priests didn't bow to Paul's God necessarily, but they didn't bow to the other God. So it wasn't by their works. It was by grace that 7,000 beloved were saved. So that's what Paul's saying. In this new age, this new chronos, that the ones that are going to see the face of God, the Peniel, as we saw from 1 Kings 13 and Genesis 28 and stuff, or whenever he wrestled the angel or whatever, that was at 26 or 29. That we have some of the old into the new, and they were grafted in. And so here you have 7,000 who are loved for his name, who are saved by grace, who inherit the promise, who are of Israel, who become part of this church. And I don't know what the name is. Is it the Haggai? That would just be Kodesh, so it's not a different name. Is it, because church, as Tyndale pointed out, doesn't necessarily mean some new creation that's separate from Israel. It just means assembly, and assembly was always part of it. And Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there you have it. So his people are just those that follow him. So who is a jade? One who is one inwardly. The one who one's outwardly is the hypocrite. The one that wants to seem like they do pray in public and have their fringes long, their phylacteries and all that. That's not his people. So say here in 62:2, you call by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord will designate. So they don't even know what it would be called yet. And if you look here in verse 12, it says, and they will call them the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord. And you will be called a sought out city, not forsaken. Now, I get strong feelings from Isaiah 61 that this is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew and Luke. So I want to go there, but I really want to point out how in 59 there was nobody to save them, none. There's no one righteous. So God himself had to save them. So all the promises of this suffering servant in the second temple, if it was, that actually saves his people, that the Lord is actually coming down himself and working through this person, is clear as day in 59. We have 61, and 60 reminds me so much of the wise men coming to see him. And if I could point out, there's so much I want to show you in 2nd and 3rd Isaiah, but even 1st Isaiah, but there's just so much I want to say, so I just gotta get through it. For thus says the high and exalted one, who lives forever, whose name is holy, I dwell on a high place, and also with the contrite and lowly in spirit, in order to revive the spirit of the lowly, to revive the heart of the contrite. Now, I think this is what Jesus is saying. And I lean towards he comes in the volume of the book. And all of the things that are of injustice, he has 0 parts except as the suffering servant. The ones who were punished for Israel's wickedness. And so who is that? The ritual system, the sacrifice system. So he comes in the volume of the book. So every time they mentioned the scapegoat, the blood, everything, that was all pointing to him. And so he comes in the volume of the book, and he was as a living sacrifice. His body was the offering, as David had said. So he desires not the sacrifice. So, but people would want to sit there and say, "Oh, I'm so glad Jesus suffered. I'm so glad he died. I'm so glad I'm forgiven." Hebrews 10 says this isn't good. You're basically wanting to sacrifice another animal when you do that. It was always about obedience, and you are forgiven. That's what the kingdom is about, forgiveness. But that doesn't mean you don't have to repent. That's what John came preaching, and Jesus said that's the beginning of the kingdom. But apparently from Isaiah, that's what they needed to do. The ones that was going to be saved, by and large, there's probably a few innocent victims. There's probably like 9 people, the suffering servants, that weren't guilty and still paid, but the rest were to be, the second temple, or the 40 years before coming into the promised land. You have this second Exodus, the second exile, where 40 years they're supposed to go out and spread the word to the nations. And then you have the separation of the sheep and the goats. It's incumbent on this generation to choose sides. And it's not going to be all the other people. These walls, these separations are not what he desires. Yes, of good and bad, but that's his wall of fire. That's not something for people to build. Now, if you peep 55:5, it says, "Behold, you will call a nation you do not know, and a nation which knows you not will run to you, because the Lord of God, even the Holy One of Israel, has glorified you." Well, as I'm saying, this all points to Jesus. He has glorified his servant, the one who did obey his law, the one who is their teacher, the real guy that they didn't listen to, is going to be a light to the nations. And so you do have the sons going still, because all of the principalities of the world, which were the false gods, are done. We now only have monotheism in all of the West. But really, the biblical context of the world, the oikoumenia, was all the house of the earth. The house of the earth were the ones they knew about. It was relative. So that whole area, they believed within those 70 years, it was going to spread throughout all this area. And then when it reached all those people, they would have to make this decision, which side they on. And those that was on the side of the temple cult was on the wrong side. And they continued to be on the wrong side after that. The people that was on the right side was his temple. His temple was the suffering servant. And the suffering servant, it wasn't by not being destroyed. When they're looking for their temple, they can't look at the physical temple and worry that, if they destroy it, we have nothing left, because it was never about that in the first place. But then you still have people like that. They want to build a temple. They want to get it going, cracking again. All right. Now, if I could just briefly get to the New Testament a little bit, and then I'll conclude this video. I'll do all my intils. All my intils can wait until the next video. But if I could turn you to Matthew 18. Let's start with Matthew 6 and 7. Matthew 6, 7. "And when you are praying, Do not use meaningless repetition like the Gentiles do. So, but we know the ones that were doing these meaningless repetitions were Yehudites. So how do you reconcile that? This is how Jesus and Paul saw it. The real worshipers were the ones that worship in spirit and truth. This isn't true. This is hypocritical. They just want to be seen. So he's using the term, and Paul uses the same terminology. The way Paul sees it, the Israel of God is those that do as he says. It's not those that were born a certain way and do opposite of what he says. Straight up. I hate to break it to you. And if you turn to Matthew 18:17, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen to even the church, let him to be you as a Gentile or a tax collector. So a Gentile was not part of the congregation. So the church, you say, oh, he was just born under the law, so he's just talking about the law. Well, he's talking about the church. So the church has to be part of the assembly. And therefore, Gentile is one that isn't listening to what you tell. Well, guess what? He's telling something new. That's what the kingdom is. It's what people tell each other about whose God is. It's the Son of Man. And if you don't confess that, then you're one of the goats. Straight up. It's that simple. And before I conclude this video, just want to turn to Luke 12:30. I want to do so much from Luke 12. Honestly, I don't believe Luke was written to be part of a 15,000-page book, 1,500-page book, I mean. I think that Luke was written to be a standalone to people who had some knowledge about the law. That's what it really boils down to. Corinthians were mostly Gentiles. Acts 18, but the thing is, they were started by people that weren't, and they have enough. They're far enough east that were under the Persian auspices at one point that they have a little bit of culture compared to Romans, that they're so far west that anybody who's subscribing to this Christianity that Paul would be talking to is relatively interested in Eastern philosophy for some reason. That if they come from the East or had been like Titus, he was reading the book of Isaiah for some reason. So people of Rome in Paul's letter to the Romans would more likely than people of Corinth identify with this term lost tribe, or basically Hebrew or whatever, than the church in Corinth would. But because the church of Corinth was people that didn't come from this, and they had parts of a similar culture enabled to them, they didn't really understand as well as somebody of Rome would, that they needed more guidance in terms of the nitty-gritty of everyday life, where the Romans, they wanted an answer to who is a J and who is a G, and just clear up all that. And Paul does, and that's why we're going to get into Romans and all that. But Luke, I think, he wanted to just write a history that could stand alone, and this is why I think Matthew and John was written later, because if you go to Luke 16, he's talking about Lazarus as just a dude. Well, he's in the rich man's house. Well, do you know what I think? I think the rich man was Simeon, and he was a Pharisee, and his slaves were Lazarus and Bethany and Martha and all them. They were his servants. He owned them. And that's why Jesus breaks it down in terms of using the things of mammon, because he knows how the world is. That born into this time, there was a lot of bad stuff going on, and the one who anointed him in Luke was, there can't be two anointings, was none other than Mary of Bethany, because that's what it says in John, and therefore Mary of Bethany is Mary Magdalene, because she was the one, the sinful woman, and so. But I don't think everything you can go from gospel to gospel and parse out is directly linear, because I don't think that they were written to completely conform to each other. And if they were, I believe that was the work of the scribes. They were trying to make them conform to each other. So I do think we can learn everything we need to from Luke, but what I'm trying to do is combat Hebrew Israelites and stuff that want to try to, and Hebrew roots people that try to deny things in the gospel by going to the old and trying to make that true. So I'm trying to point out that even in the new, they're going to the old and trying to confirm that and make a points and stuff like that. And I'm trying to help show what that is. But that's a lot of time and energy. I want this to stop. I want this to immediately stop right now, where we are continuing this Hebrew Israelite thing to misunderstand what the gospel is saying. Everything we need to know is right here in Luke. But people keep on cherry picking things from the old and saying, this hasn't happened, this hasn't happened, so therefore none of this has happened. And Jesus was just some guy that gave some hint, and then the future is some imminent danger, so it doesn't even really matter what he said anyways, and he wasn't even doing what he's supposed to do anyways, and give it a rest. And the way that they willpower seems to be missing what Jesus taught when they reduced Jesus to just a teacher in the first place, or a model, and they want to try to do the opposite. So what's the point, really, of the New Testament then? You're just completely ignoring it all. I really want to go into Luke 16, where there's so much in Luke 16. But verse 18, it seems to completely contradict the law. Deuteronomy 24, Jesus said, he gave you the law. Matthew 5, he gave you the law because your hearts are hard. Well, Matthew is incredibly attuned to the Hebrew frame of mind, and that's what Paul was into. Paul in Acts 18 shaved his head. Nobody asked him to. In Acts 21 they did, to go along and pay for other people to go through that, but he was still under this. In Acts 15, he let them put the Gentiles under Torah. No, he didn't have them circumcised, but under Torah, there was something called the righteous ger. And this person, you could sell dead animals to. They just couldn't eat blood, and so on and so forth. So Paul was still under this. So that's what Matthew's doing. Matthew, he's saying, oh, only for infidelity can you divorce, because Matthew is thinking about this frame of mind. And in this frame of mind, Yahweh, or whatever his name is, divorced Israel, divorced Judah, modus ponens from Jeremiah 3. So because of infidelity, and that's what divorce means, to put him away. And we see Hosea, they were put away, only to be remarried or whatever, but that new wife would be a new name, and composed of different elements. Now, when we get into divorce, where Luke and Mark, they say it's just prohibited. Well, this is contrary to Moses, unless you would say this disfavor that Moses found while you're trying to make godliness, cleanliness and all that disfavor would be infidelity, and therefore, just like God, just like it all adds up. No, it's not like that. Hey, Madison Drew, how are you? How are you? Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming. So clearly Jesus says no divorce, because we see him talk about this right before the rich man and Lazarus. Well, the rich man and Lazarus was his slave. So he wants to not be there for his slave, to basically divorce him, to let him die, let the dogs lick him and all this, give him nothing. Well, in these old days, yes, it is so much so. I'm trying to be edifying. Like when I'm trying to say medicine, because of all these people just giving up on each other, that's not what God has intended. He didn't want, oh, you find disfavor with your wife, just write her a bill of divorce and get you a new wife. Because in these days, it was hard for a woman. She had to work in the home or something. She couldn't go out and to chop bricks or whatever. They didn't let her. So Jesus was protecting women. He was saying that if God never divorced Israel, how can you just take your wife and say, I loved you one day and now I'm done with you? How is that godliness? So this is what the rich man is doing to Lazarus, just putting him away. Yes, I want to be giving you the meat. To me, the New Testament's the meat, and the Torah is the milk. But it's funny that Isaiah said that Gentiles will nurse Israel. Well, here Israel is agnostic and atheist and everything, and don't read the Torah and hear all these Christians knowing Torah better than they do. So it's actually fulfilling prophecy. Just like Caiaphas said, it's better for one man to die for our country than for our whole people to leave. This is like Isaiah, like Jesus died for his whole country. Caiaphas actually got a vision of all of this unfolding. But so here I am in Luke 12. I really want to talk a lot about Luke 16, but I'm getting myself distracted. But there's so much in Luke 12. I think all of the answers, if you want to look at things very simply, are in Luke 12. But I wanted to particularly point out a couple of things. I wanted to point out Luke 12:30, which says, "For all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you need these things." So all these things like the clothes and stuff, Jesus is saying the lilies, the wildflowers, they're ornately covered in decor. The birds, they have food. So he's saying, don't worry. In verse 19 says, verse 18 says, then he says, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns. So this is what the rich man does. He says, I'm going to tear down my barns and build more barns. Then I'll have enough. But he could die tomorrow, and then all this is for nothing. So this is what he's saying in Luke 16. Those little things we do have in this world, if we use it to love on each other, to give to each other, to be there for each other, then we do become part of the kingdom. The kingdom on earth is through helping each other, through charity, through good things, with a contrite heart, with a humble heart. This was in the old. This isn't something new. But they got lost. They became hypocritical. They missed all this. So this is why he comes, to set the record straight, to give them this new law, to fulfill all things. For his elect's sake, time was cut short. And even Peter, he was told, yes, love does cover multitudes. Thank you. Even Peter was told, when you come to faith, bring your brothers. So Peter, he said, all that you loose will be loosed. He was going to be given the power to judge. He was even going to betray him. And how did he betray him? By not confessing his name, saying he never knew him. And that's what Jesus is asking us of us. Not a whole lot. Just confession. And that confession is that the Son of Man is loved. I mean, people thought they were separated from God. That's why he said, a virgin shall conceive, and his name will be Emmanuel. God's with you. God will come tabernacle with you. Zechariah 12. It was meant to be that God himself would come down and redeem the people and teach them and everything else because of all the wickedness. And this was Second Temple. And there's so much from the Second Temple that was wrong. And you can tell they don't talk as much about idolatry being the problem, even though you do see a little bit of it. And I would say that would be from Mammon. Their gods were their own bellies. The Levites were getting fat by all the people's sins. The more people sinned, the more they got to eat. And this had to stop. All the hypocrisy, all the injustice. That was the problem in the first temple too. Idolatry was just a symptom of that, or a cause of that, or something. But it was part and parcel. It was part of the same thing. But yeah, they talk about the wedding feast and everything in Luke 12. So there's so much in Luke 12. I think we can really learn about eschatology and our purpose and a lot from Luke 12. And like I said in my last video, who is the one? Fear the one who cannot just kill you, but can send your body to hell. I think that when people try to make God that person, they're missing verse 4. The men kill you. So really, it's about choice. It's, are you going to live in fear and just follow what the priests were telling you to do? This is what happened to Paul and all them. Paul was whipped. The apostles, they were beheaded and everything. It was the people of the old trying to stop this new way, this revelation, the fulfillment of the epoch, the apocalypse, that they were trying to stop this. But the marriage is the end. And so it says, woe to you Pharisees, for you love the chief seats in the synagogues. But he had said, you need to have a contrite heart. Jesus lambasted his disciples for trying to be first. I want to be first. I want to be first. So do not fear that can kill the body. Who can kill the soul? The false teacher. The false teacher, because they make you more 7 times a child of hell. You clear out your insides, and then it's vacant, and they can fill with all kinds of stuff. You need to be filled with the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is the one that confessed that Jesus is Lord, that he did good things. He can't be sent from the devil because he did good. And a house divided cannot stand. It's that simple. But they really get it twisted and confused. And, the people are saying, oh, he didn't fulfill the old because I don't see the signs. Well, because you're blind. And because they didn't see the signs, he said, this generation is a wicked generation. It seeks for a sign, and yet no sign will be given up but the sign of Jonah. What's the sign of Jonah? It was to a people that were his people, that were fearing sudden destruction. So this is because of their wicked ways. So the sign of Jonah was, hey, God's telling you to repent. He was in the earth for 3 days. He come back out just to give you this message. And a lot of people don't have a message. A lot of people don't read the New Testament. A lot of people don't hear the gospel. But Isaiah had talked about the gospel, the necessity of the gospel. Yes, please. Which one? 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians? I love them both. Which verses are you in right now? Yes, Corinthians is probably my favorite. 1st and 2nd Corinthians are probably my favorites. Whatever. Yeah, I love Corinthians. So yeah, just let me know, Madison. 1 Corinthians, yeah, 1 Corinthians. Yeah, I love 1 Corinthians. It's one of my favorite books. Which chapter are you on? 7. I keep on getting drawn to 7. I love 6. 6 everyone needs 6. 6 is very important for the kingdom mentality. Oh yeah, 3 is very important too. I need to learn about a lot from 3. I make that mistake all the time. Oh yes, 1 and 2 are so powerful. 1 and 2 are game changers. Yes, yes. Yeah, 1 is so powerful. It tells you so much in 1. And that's what I was saying earlier about Jonah. Yeah, you called it. You probably called this. Jonah, there would be no sign, but the sign of. Or sorry, there would be no sign but the sign of Jonah. Well, he says right here, First Corinthians chapter 1. Uh, all right, verse 22. For indeed, the Jews ask for a sign, for signs, and the Greeks search for wisdom. So it says right there what I'm saying. That they seek for a sign. This wicked generation, which isn't race of people or anything, it's that generation, meaning those 40 years between 30 AD and 70 AD, between when the message went out and when the temple was destroyed, that generation would have no sign but Jonah, and they seek for a sign. That's what Matthew 18 or whatever I was just in. I'm at Luke 12 or whatever I was just in. They said, or Matthew 6, I can't remember. I just saw it. They was asking for a sign. That's what they was doing. That's why he said that. Miracles. Like if you go back to the Old Testament, something was true because somebody who wasn't supposed to have a kid had a kid, or some army that's supposed to win lost, or signs. It wasn't about faith. That they had to be proved. And it's not that they didn't seek after wisdom too. I mean, there's wisdom books and everything like that. Chapter 10 is very powerful. I learned a lot from chapter 10, 1 Corinthians 10. I can't wait till I actually prefer 2 Corinthians 2 to or sorry, 2 Corinthians to 1 Corinthians. It's just hard to say. 2 Corinthians is different, but and I don't like all of it more. It's just there's a few chapters in 2 Corinthians that I think are just very, very powerful. And that's where you see the red ink too. So I wanted to save all my discussion about until my next video. How the usage of until doesn't necessarily mean like then it's something completely different. It just means until that point this was the case. But after that, it could keep on going. It could. I mean, there is obviously some change, but what that really means, we'll get into. Yeah, yeah. I always get more when I read it again. My eyes seem to go over and miss things somehow, and when I get further in, I see more things. It's true. Reading it a second, third, fourth time really illuminates things even more than the first time. Especially with Paul's letters, because there's so much to take in. It's so meaty. Yeah, I know. It's so meaty. Paul's words, like in my study Bibles, a lot of times certain pages, like 1 Corinthians 1, Paul's text is smaller than the notes. Like there's just so many notes on it that it's really meaty. And that's why I think to understand Paul, it's important to go back and read all this, but it's not necessary. I prefer if I wasn't so curious. I prefer if I would just listen to what Paul said at face value and just take it. But I got to know for myself. So I go back in there and read it. And yeah, it checks out. And I didn't always see that. I didn't think Paul was always right. I used to believe in the law and all that. Yeah, it's really meaty. All right, Madison. I'm gonna check out of here. I appreciate you coming. My next video, I'll deal with Romans 11 and a lot of stuff. Then I can get back to Exodus, no, Numbers 14. Numbers 14 is before the 40 years. So this brings us to the time of Pentecost, of the disciples. The disciples were at the beginning of the 40 years. And then after 40 years would be the judgment in that generation. And so I think the beginning of the 40 years in the wilderness, and a lot of the messages said in Genesis 14 are very important, and we can't understand what it all means without dealing with John 17. And then we'll finally get into what Pentecost is. I tried to do it by last Pentecost, hopefully by the next. Sorry, this stuff there's so many different threads. It's a tapestry or whatever, that they wove this Bible into, especially Paul's works. Like Hebrews comes through so many different angles, so super interesting. So bless your heart too, Madison. Love you. Take care. Peace.